know what we're doing. I looked over to my wife and she's in tears. She also suffered from some of these challenges throughout her time, but I mention this because later, and throughout these 8 years, it was my joy turned to sorrow, and there were times where I was left in tears. 4 schools and dozens of educational professionals later, we have gleaned several thoughts, ideas. Again, I know this represents a small sliver of the Foreign Service population, so I won't take up a lot of time. I look forward to answering questions and giving comfort to those who may be just beginning this journey. But the first one is simply the importance of advocacy. I'm hoping some of these observations apply to other areas, whether it's elder parent issues or jobs or whatever. But the importance of advocacy in the case of a young child, obviously there's no substitute for a parent. Am I okay? Yeah, I'm sounding like I'm puffing into the microphone. Am I too close?
Use the big one.
Okay, how's that? A little better. Yeah, sorry. In the case of a young child, obviously there's no substitute for a parent advocating on their behalf. But it's not a part-time job. My wife, who's a stay-at-home mom, has spent countless hours advocating for my boy, even to this day, here in America. So my advice there, for those of you who haven't begun, advocate early, often. Of course, you cannot drown out the voices of others also in need. These programs are critical, but they're not limitless. So we all have to, take account of that. The second one, and Margot and I were just chatting before the presentation about IEPs, individual education programs, which we learned early on were a nice thing to have and they're important to have, but absent parents and interested parties to enforce those agreements, if you will, they're almost like, as I like to put it, like my last assignment in Africa, where we pass laws but we don't enforce them. So if you don't have someone's team of people to help ensure that that contract, if you will, that basket of goods is available and working for your child, then it's really not worth anything more than the paper it's printed on. 2 other quick ones before I surrender the mic. Again, this is my wife's contribution. I said, well, I'm going before this panel. What else do you want me to say? And she said, make sure they know about the game 52 pickup. Remember as kids, the game with the deck of cards fling. That's our experience every time we move. It's just like you're starting over with your child's program, not just their IEP, but their corrective team, their team of experts. It's just frankly not easy to cobble that team together in the first place. And then for those who serve many which are at the state end, those of you in the room, you just don't pick up the yellow pages in every post and look up, educational psychologist or learning specialist. But it's a bit, how do you say, inefficient, but you're not going to quit on your child. So it's just something that, as a working member of the Foreign Service, with a spouse, it's just the cost of doing business. And then the final observation, if you'll allow me, is the expression, it takes a village to raise a child, takes on infinite new meaning overseas. I referenced that lost in space metaphor, where when you're reconstructing teams or trying to get the help for your child they need, which perhaps has worked in the past, it's just it's not clear where help can be found, and it might be above, below, behind you, back in that last post in America, and the like. So it isn't just a trail, a two-dimensional search. It's on multi-dimensions, up, down, left, right, backwards, forward. Time sensitive. Did this work in the past? Is it going to work again? And of course, I don't regret the fact that this all came down in my Foreign Service career, but we had several opportunities to bail on the Foreign Service, and we gave it careful thought, and perhaps when I talk later about some other observations and things that we did to protect ourselves, you'll understand why having an escape plan is something you need to consider in the special needs context. So I just will stop there, save my thanks to the rest of the panel for their expertise and their advocating the programs that we have been big consumers of.
Thanks very much, Steve. I met Steve and his wife many years ago on their first tour in Mexico when I was the clone. Of course, they had no children then, and life was easy then. And there are a number of demographics we have not touched on in the Foreign Service, which were, I think, all touched on in the Foreign Service Journal, and I'm sure that some of these will come up in the questions, but we haven't talked about single parents. We haven't really talked about domestic partners and the issues they face. We haven't talked about tandems, singles without kids, and sort of married and married with children is generally what we have covered here. So I open this to the panel first. Is there anything you would like to say and address before we open this to questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts you have on what some of the other panel members share? Kathie?
One thing, Judy is showing her branding. Oh, I haven't turned my key up. Now, can you hear me now? Judy mentioned branding of work life, and it's absolutely one of the first things you need to do. She said you do this because when people see that, they know that feels good and that's for them. When I was the National Work Life Director at KPMG, so I'm just showing a second example. We branded work life this way, so that anytime you saw this indelible image, you knew this was about you and your life. And one of the things that's happening in most organizations today that are work-life friendly, now of course you can't afford, and nobody does a thing like this, a big print piece. So online, you have places to go that will say my life, my work, my pay, my whatever, and that's very common. But it is essential that you provide a space and a place and a connector for everybody to know when they see this, that's a good thing. The other thing I'd point out, we did this piece. One of the problems, we've been talking about connecting with the programs, and what a surprise it always is that people don't know that you have all this stuff you've spent thousands, if not millions of dollars to provide. Always the big disappointment, and benefits too, it's not just work life. This is a piece that we deliberately did, and it is organized by life event. This is a second tool, besides system approach to that work-life professionals have. The other thing is a life cycle methodology. So this is organized not by what you have to know. For example, when I first got to the firm, one of the things I found out is that women who were pregnant, there was no maternity policy. There was nothing that ever said pregnant or maternity policy. So what we had to do was create a user-friendly thing with tabs. Again, this may be old technology, but then we had, I mean, there was the internet in those days, but people loved the tabs and to be able to look at, I'm having a baby, I'm adding to my family. And we put some unpleasant things in here, like I'm getting divorced, I'm buying a car, I'm blending my family, I'm sick, somebody in my family is sick. So if you go at it by life event, you're much more likely to catch people where they live, because they don't live in policies. They don't want to look up maternity or anything else, and they shouldn't have to be benefits experts. So a couple of things that make the consumption and the connection with all this a lot easier.
One of the things I want to say is that some of you may have seen there was a Washington Post article yesterday talking about Steve, and Kathie's also mentioned as I was interviewed for that. It occurred to me how infrequently you really hear people grouse about the lack of work-life balance in the Foreign Service. And I think it's because all of us believe in the mission and we know it's critical. And I think as a result we tend to not really articulate some of the needs that we have, and in some cases, very critical needs that need to be attended to right away So what I was surprised at is I kept thinking, okay, we're a very unique organization, we have very unique requirements, but what surprised me when I came back and started, thanks to the general